We'll be like, all right, we've gotten the go-ahead that we are live. We're not getting hypnotized by Jessica.
No.
So welcome to tonight's Crush Club Chat. I'm joined tonight by our winemaker, Andrew Windsor.
Hi, guys.
And then we have the lovely Jessica behind the cameras. Why don't you come out and say hi, Jess? And then...
She's doing it all tonight, too.
She's doing it all. Camera work, questions, giggling.
IT.
Yeah, all of it. But we have 6 wines to drink tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hop right to it.
You want to get right into it?
Let's get right into it.
It's a good way to get the mood elevated and the party started.
Right? Mainly I'm thirsty.
That and it's been 10 minutes since we tried these, so they've probably changed.
They probably have.
So I'll introduce the first one. It's our 2017 Varietal Series Chardonnay. Very excited to talk about this one. It's the first wine that we've done in our new concrete fermenters.
Ooh, Chalandrews?
Well, we named them Chalandrews.
We did.
It didn't really seem to catch on outside of...
We didn't tell anybody else that we named them after ourselves.
That could have been the issue. We didn't tell anybody that we named them.
I'll make a memo tomorrow.
Okay. So aside from the tanks, the wine itself comes from 2017, only a year ago, which is should still be in my memory. Very typical vintage, I would say, for Tinhorn. I think, did Moon go through vintages a little bit last time out? Or
he did.
Okay.
He did.
So
the main focus was on this year's vintage. So
I think we have 5 vintages in the flight tonight. So I'll
just
briefly talk about it because
wine
vintages are very important for BC wines because they are significantly different year in and year out. So when I say a typical vintage in 2017, it means it falls within sort of like the 25-year average weather patterns. But for me, starting here in 2014, 2017 was probably the first true cool vintage for me at Tinhorn. So really, really great Chardonnay vintage, great sort of Burgundy varietal vintage. Also really nice for Syrahs. All of the Bordeaux varieties are still in barrel, so we're still working on those. But this wine would have been about 30% barrel fermented, a little bit of French oak, a little bit of American oak, 30% done in concrete, and then 30% done in stainless steel. What are you smelling?
I'm getting a lot of almost, it's like very like creamy. You can definitely smell that creaminess to it. You can get a little bit of the lemon, but not a huge amount. How did you feel the difference is like going in from concrete versus non-concrete for the 16? Do you feel like, I'm not sure if I taste a huge difference, but I haven't tasted a lot of wines personally that have been
aged and
fermented. So what are the big differences that people can look for?
I think you find that the palate is a little bit more restrained than our previous vintages, which were predominantly barrel fermented and stainless steel. So stainless steel tends to sort of amplify aromatics, whereas barrels tend to amplify power and texture in the wine. And so we kind of had a powerful wine with a lot of aromatics before. Now with the concrete sort of in there, it kind of finds a nice middle ground. So I find that a little bit less palate intensity. The oak tends to sort of jump out with a lot of tropical fruit flavor. So this is a little bit more restrained, a bit more floral, a bit more citrusy. And then I find that the concrete really just still gives it that texture that we were looking from the barrels, but without as much barrel flavor. So it's a really pretty expression. And it's worked really well with the cooler vintage as well.
Do you have a question? No? I thought she had her hand up. No?
Crack my wrist.
Oh, nice.
Just cracking wrists.
Just cracking wrists, taking names.
Of course.
I actually really prefer this over the 16 because now that I can see it a little bit more after you explained like the differences of what the concrete does to it. I can taste it a little bit more. I'm looking for that subtlety now in it. But this is a beautiful wine. This is really drink worthy.
Definitely. And I think when we come from previous vintages that were warmer, our Chardonnays They tend to stand out because they are a little bit stronger South Okanagan, so it is warmer than most of the vineyards to the north of us. So I think it's a really good balanced style that is showing well younger. I find our previous vintages, like even the 16 is probably only drinking well now. I'm sure most of you have drank your 16s already and are starting to tap into this one. But I think the barrel fermented style tends to take a little bit longer to show well, and that's also why we, the Reserve Chardonnay, not in this flight, but that's a wine that is almost 2.5+ years old at release.
Yeah,
be careful. It needs more time.
Be careful when you say Reserve Chardonnay. Like, these guys are hungry for Reserve Chardonnay.
I am. Everyone is.
Right? Like, I'm just like,
it's delicious.
Is it spring yet? You have a question.
I have a question.
Yay.
It's from our favorite Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Yeah.
Hi, Carol.
It's actually something we were talking about earlier about the vineyards. She wants to know if anything has changed with the vineyards. So where we get our grapes from.
Not a lot. I mean, we've been buying some fruit from Hidden Terrace, which is an organic farm up near Covert. So if you know the area, as you're driving south in the Okanagan, you come around McIntyre Bluff. It's an elevated vineyard site on a beautiful sandy bench. It's a little bit cooler, so it's definitely allowed our wines to be a little bit prettier, whereas the bulk of our state fruit is on Black Sage. And so that's a generally quite hot site, sandy soil, so lower in acidity. So I find the balance of the grape supply is actually giving us a little bit more of a delicate and prettier style. And that's pretty much new as of 2017, so this vintage.
Just an add-on to this, I think what she also means is, are we producing different varietals as well than we have? Because I know we had we could touch base on the Roussanne or things like that. I don't know if we've talked about some of the new varietals that we're producing possibly.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Chardonnay, we've really, the only thing that I think is different about this one is predominantly the concrete. The supply of fruit is pretty consistent for us. I don't think that answers the question, but
no.
Just was like, no, it doesn't, Andrew. But
so maybe read the question again.
Yeah.
So, like, does she mean, like, what are we doing with other varietals?
Yeah,
like,
so have you changed any of the vineyards? So changing grapes.
I think the only one.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a constant state
yeah.
of vineyard evolution here. Yeah. And I think that's been probably the most fun part of me and Andrew Moon coming on board. And that's not new. It's been happening since he started. It's, Ken and Sandra were the sort of people that originally did the first plantings down here 20+ years ago. And they were pioneers then. And so the varieties that they were putting in, nobody had faith that they would succeed, except for probably Ken and Sandra and a few people that started to follow their lead after. But there's certain varieties that we've seen now succeed better than others. And we've been in a slow transition, an expensive one, to evolve our vineyards to produce the best wines with the sites that we have. And so a good example, you brought up Roussanne. Historically, that had been a Kerner vineyard that we'd used for ice wine forever. Ice wine production we dropped in 2013 was, I think, the last vintage.
It was the last vintage.
And so those Kerner vines that were 20+ years old, nobody likes to tear up old vines, but you put a vineyard through ice wine harvests for 20 years, there's not much left of the vine's sort of vitality after that. And so we needed to replant those, and we struck out and planted them with Roussanne. And so that's, one example, but there's been lots of small modifications that Andrew Moon's been at for a decade now. And I've been a part of that influence for about 5 years now myself. So that's a constant part of a progressive winery plan. But does that answer the question?
That does.
Okay.
I think if we're jumping back to concrete now,
okay.
We do have a question from Stuart and Bobby.
Hi, Stuart and Bobby.
Yes. They want to know are all our wines cellared on site and how many use concrete? And you can kind of incorporate this as well. And is the concrete only used for whites as well?
So the first part of the question is yes, all the wines are aged on site, all the wines made on site. In terms of what's gone through concrete, we just got them last year. So they are very much a new part of our program. The one that we're trying now is the first one to be passed through those tanks. And then they spent, they went to bottle, I think, in May. So between May and about a month ago, we started to put through some Sauvignon Blanc that we barrel fermented. So this year it's being used currently for some 2-bench components, 2-bench white components, which is the next one that we'll get into. And then we're actually going to pull those out and put in the Chardonnay for the varietal series again after that. So we do use them for multiple purposes throughout harvest. And that's...
Well, I think you provided us with our perfect segue
right
to get into the next one.
To the 2-bench.
To the 2-bench. We've got 6 wines. It seems that every time we're together, there's a lot of wine. You asked before we started what our record was.
I thought that was my minimum.
And I blew you away with 8.
Yes.
We drank 8 at the library one in January of this year.
Tasted. Winemakers prefer to say tasted.
Tasted.
Even though,
we got through them afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, they are consumed.
Yeah.
So 2-bench, 2017. This is one that I usually like to put down for a little bit as well. I'm only pretending that I'm showing it to you, but I'm actually reading the percentages of the varieties, which is 28% Sauvignon Blanc.
They would have never known.
25. Well, I don't have to make things up anymore. 25% Chardonnay, 23% Viognier, 18% Semillon, 6% Muscat. And to be honest, I don't really...
I feel like that's our highest percentage of Semillon I've ever seen.
It might be up there.
That's a pretty high percentage of Semillon.
No, it's been up to 20.
Really?
I think 14 was above 20.
Oh, yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. I love this one. I always do. And for me, the best part about this one is the fact that it doesn't really matter what the percentages are. It tastes like 2-bench white every vintage. Whether it's 50% Sauvignon Blanc or 20% Sauvignon Blanc, to me, it just, of a white blend that tastes like terroir is super unique. And obviously, being a part of this, the production of this one, I'm very attached to it. But when I try white blends that exist out in the market, none of them seem to have that same consistency and express terroir, which is quite unique for a fine variety.
Well, and this one is really unique in the fact that, like, when we always tend to we find quite a bit of it in the warehouse just before library ship. And then, but it's the number one. Like, I think we did a vertical of 3 vintages starting in 2009.
Right.
Last January, and the 2009 sold faster than anything else. It was probably one of our favorites of the night.
Well, it's always got longevity too, which is impressive with the wine.
Which is interesting because people tend to think, oh, I can't age white wine.
And back to 2009, that one probably would have been 100% done in stainless steel.
Yeah.
But since 14, I've introduced some barrel fermentation, and I think for this wine, it's just a Sauvignon Blanc that goes into French oak, all native ferments. So that would make it, less than 30% oak.
Yes, Jessica?
Speaking of one of the varietals that's in this wine, we have a question from Larry. Why you don't make a pure Semillon?
Ooh,
dun, dun, dun. Good question, Larry. And I wish Moon was here to answer this one because Semillon for us is in a bit of a challenging spot because I always love our Semillon about a year after it's been made, and so we've kept these varieties separate many times, trying to find out whether or not it's especially my first few years here at Tinhorn, I'd ferment every variety on its own. Semillon never seemed to be the strongest prior to blending. But when you try this wine, say now, this wine was bottled in May. To me, the Semillon is one of the best components of it now. Mm-hmm. So why don't we make a single varietal Semillon? First off, I don't think anybody does because they don't sell very well. Maybe you're from Australia or from Bordeaux, but nobody really does Semillon in the Okanagan, which is probably bit of a tragedy. But
You tend to see a lot of Semillon Viognier blends, I find.
Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends
Yeah.
are more traditional because that's your Bordeaux white combo. With a bit of Muscadel in there. But for Semillon single varietal, you'll have, I'm trying to think of global examples, you'd have your Barossa.
Mhm.
They'll call it Semillon because they're Australian and French is the last thing they'll figure out. And then you go to Western Australia, they do have a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. But the probably only single varietal version of a Semillon that I can think of outside of Bordeaux, I don't think there's many, would be Hunter Valley. And I think they actually call it Semillon there, not Semillon.
I kind of want to call it Semillon now, though. Just saying. Like,
Yeah, just don't have any French people around because they'll ridicule you for the rest of your
right?
life.
And like
Yeah.
my maiden name is French, so like I could never do it. It's like Semillon.
Maybe that's the
It's just my
best part
rebellion.
about it. Yeah.
Right? There
Yeah.
you go. So why the Sauvignon Blanc that sees barrel fermenting on this? Because typically you would see like the natural choice I would think would be Chardonnay. And this is something I've always wondered myself, is why the Sauvignon Blanc?
Okay. My first vintage here, 2014, my first pick was on September 3rd, and it was Sauvignon Blanc. And I wanted to take the opportunity to barrel ferment it and add nothing to it, to let it ferment naturally. That wine took 2.5 months to ferment in barrel, but proved to be absolutely delicious. And so that kind of got me on a streak of barrel fermenting Sauvignon Blanc. Story goes back a little bit further. We're already out of time on this wine, but I'm going to mention two influences. One was my work in Marlborough in New Zealand. So made more Sauvignon Blanc probably in a week there than I will for the rest of my life anywhere else combined. Slightly, I don't say put off by Sauvignon Blanc, but I didn't drink Sauvignon Blanc for probably 2 years after that. Then I moved to Ontario and worked for, ironically, my previous boss, who's my current boss now. And Craig McDonald makes, by far, and till this day, probably my favorite Sauvignon Blanc. And so I pretty much took his barrel program, which is a French oak barrel program, and native ferments, combined the two and used that as, I think, sort of really the base of how I like the Sauvignon Blanc component of this wine. So the Chardonnay component has historically come from the stainless steel component of the varietal series Chardonnay. So,
Okay.
yes.
Just a note, Vicky just let us know that there's a few varietals from Niagara, which you might be familiar with the Semillon.
I mean, I grew up in suburban Toronto, and there's no standout Semillons that are.
Okay.
Maybe you were looking for Semillons.
Yeah, it could have been that. Yeah.
I think that's probably what
I'm here to try the Semillon. Sorry, sir. Do you have ID? Get the hell out of here.
But I have a beard.
Yeah.
You need to take me seriously.
No respect for the Semillon. Sorry, Australia.
All right, so
Ooh,
we are on to the reds.
What did you think of the two bench? We didn't even
You
actually.
know what? We didn't
about
actually
flavors.
talk about the taste of
Yeah.
it.
We gotta go.
Okay,
but
whatever. It is what it is. They know us. Okay. So beautiful, beautiful nose on it.
Mhm.
Great tropical fruit on it. I almost think juicy fruit, like juicy fruit gum, like just like the first like juicy fruit commercial.
Still, yeah, has to be kind of bananas. And,
Yeah, that
but
banana.
tropical
Yeah, and
passion
then
fruit.
yeah, it was great. It was.
I mean, we're drinking this at room temperature, and it is perfect. Right
It's actually
now.
perfect.
Yeah.
Like it's not too cold. It's excellent. But let's move on to the Old Field
Moving on.
Reserve 2014 Pinot Noir.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is memories of the past. This is
Oh,
4 years ago.
so this is actually our first year.
This one,
Yeah. This
Well,
is our first year.
it
We
was.
started the same year.
it was.
That's why we love each other so much.
And so we did go into the vintages, the 17. So 14, going back, I've been very lucky. I probably mentioned this before in previous episodes. when I shift to new wineries, which I've done, I don't know, often, let's just say, this is the longest I've worked anywhere since high school here at Tinhorn. So
Aww.
prior to that, every time I moved to a new winery, which is usually in a new province or country or whatever, it was always like one of the best vintages.
We did tease you a lot.
And so, no, well, it makes it easy for a new winemaker to claim that he does a good job when it's absolutely perfect weather. And 2014 was probably
Perfect weather.
that. Certainly for Pinot, for like an all-around vintage for all the varieties that we grow, 2014 is probably pretty hard to beat. And so just a little bit of background on this wine. We started to introduce a bit of whole cluster and the open top ferments. So whole clusters are essentially, and we'll get into that when we talk about the whole cluster Cab Franc, but we'll put in the bunch, a hand-picked bunch, so literally the grape bunch that you would find on the vine or in your grocery store. Literally, we just drop those along the bottom, and that creates carbonic maceration and carbonic fermentation, which sort of makes it a lot more fruity, a lot more punchy with sort of mid-palate fruit and cherry flavors. And this Oldfield Reserve was essentially the best barrels that we had from all the Pinot.
Yeah, this is beautiful. This is really, this actually won gold, I think, at Cascadia this year. Yeah, it did.
Sounds like it's a West Coast thing.
I think so.
Mm.
But we won gold, so we'll take it. So our Oldfield Reserve Pinot Noir is actually what got me into Pinot Noir. When I first started here, I hated Pinot Noir. I'm not afraid to admit it. But it was the 2010 that made me fall in love with it. And now, like,
the 10.
Oh God, the 10. But
yeah,
like every vintage since then, like the 12 is beautiful right now. The 14, this is gorgeous. I really like.
Well, this is the second last. The 15 is the last one that we made, and I've told that before.
Yeah, the 15 will be the last one. I would imagine that the 15 would be quite like really fruit forward because it was.
Well, we picked it much earlier than we would have in 14, and we have ever since. I mean, 15 was an outlier for a very, very hot vintage, and which is good for us, especially this year when we're picking into November, as I'm sure Andrew Moon mentioned on the Harvest Recap show.
He did not mention his bitterness of that.
I'm sure he didn't.
Well, he was still in October. He thought it was going to be over.
Oh yeah.
He was in this like humble brag moment where it's like, oh, it's going to be over like next week, and then it wasn't. So
no,
he doesn't get.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So that's probably good that he's not on this show.
Was this one of the latest harvest years on record for Tinhorn Creek? Do you know?
That's a good question. I doubt it. It is certainly since 14, since I've been here. We've never picked into November since I've been here. But would it go latest on record? I doubt it.
Okay.
I doubt it. For the most part, I think the 14 and 15 vintages, even the 16 vintage they're warmer than average. So for us, I think to be done before November is always a target because you can't rely on good weather here, certainly in the last week of October, let alone later than that.
No, the frost, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so for us to be able to have really, really good weather into the last week of October and into November, the first week of November, that's sort of probably a 1 in 10 year experience. And we were lucky because we needed it this year. Makes Andrew Moon's job more difficult as it makes mine. But you know, our job is to make good wine. And,
exactly.
These are decisions we make.
You mentioned like we're drinking the 14 and we're telling them how great it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going, but hey guys, 15 is the last vintage. So
why?
Why?
That was a decision that Jen and I made together. Jen's our sales and marketing director. Has he ever been on a webinar?
No, I think we're just
Jen, you're up next.
No, I think we're just going to keep him in the sidelines.
Okay.
You can be my apprentice.
Yeah.
Jen has no filter, so maybe it's probably good to keep him off of.
And then I have no filter, and then we both have no filter. It wouldn't be good.
So
let's just say that.
So to answer your question, the Pinot Noir total production has only ever been probably in big years 1,200 cases for all of it.
Okay.
And we would break that down into two SKUs. 300, 400 cases would go to the reserve, and they would just be the best barrel selections, and then the rest would go into the varietal series. And the bottle aging was different, the barrel aging selection, and all of that. The winemaking was different. But if you're a Pinot Noir fan, then you're typically a fan of terroir and understanding sort of the finer nuances of Pinot Noir. And for us to have two Pinot Noirs at a really small production level, to me, made no sense. Nor did it make sense to take the best 400 cases, give it another label, when all we're doing is detracting from the rest of the blend. And so Bordeaux varieties work a lot differently. They respond to another 6 months of barrel aging or another 12 months of barrel aging, and that's how the Kriek is substantially different. But Pinot Noir, we've gone kind of almost the opposite direction. This wine would have been aged at 13, 14 months in barrel. Now all of our Pinots have been dialed back to they're in bottle within 8 to 10 months of vintage. And so that's a change in style. And also, I think, just trying to make the wines more approachable and more fresh and more vibrant. And I think that style works typically for the 5 vintages I've worked here. It seems to work better.
I agree with you. I think, hands down, our favorite that we tasted during the spring releases was the 16 Pinot Noir.
Exactly.
And hands down, it's still my favorite red right now. Like, I love that wine. And so, I agree with you. Like, if we're going to move something, so is the idea that we're still going to make Pinot? It'll just be our varietal Pinot?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it cost. I think that decision cost us a lot of money to take 400 cases of a wine that cost $10 more and put it all into our varietal series. It was certainly not something that got a lot of fanfare from the people that sit around the boardroom table. But I thought we're not necessarily known for Pinot Noir, and we'd be better off to make a wine that's younger and fresher, and in my opinion, by far one of the best value Pinot Noirs.
Yeah.
Not just from Okanagan, but if you're into Pinot, like, it is over delivering massively. And we're probably 10 minutes over on this bottle.
No, we're actually in the really good time pocket right now. We actually have time for the poll.
Mm-hmm.
We have time for the poll.
Is that
for the poll.
Is that when we start dancing?
Do this.
Well, you can poll dance if you want. That might get us some wine sales. I don't know.
No,
or
probably not.
people could go blind. I don't know. It's one or the other.
I'll throw my back out and end up probably.
Just announcing this poll.
Right? I'll announce the poll.
I don't even know what the poll is.
That's why I'm announcing the poll.
Okay.
That's why I got you. I got your back.
The poll
All
master.
right. So our poll. Well, Paul likes to think so.
Hi, Paul.
He's on. Hi, Paul. Always something. So our poll is: what is your favorite fall release? Which one of? So we have the 17 Chardonnay, the 17 Two Bench White, the 14 Oldfield Reserve Pinot Noir, the 16 Merlot, the 16 Whole Cluster Cab Franc, and then the 15 the Kriek. And so let's give them a few more moments.
Do we do a double the when it comes to the Kriek? Do we do like
no
it's
the Kriek? No,
we don't. Okay,
no.
So I thought you just did a double the.
I might have, but in all fairness, I'm 3 tries in, so
okay,
that's fair.
I just thought it's something we haven't talked about.
The Kriek.
So far, it's pretty tight between Innovation Series Cab Franc and the Kriek.
The Kriek.
So,
They're loving the Kriek
Oh.
this year. It's beautiful. It's been the one at Whole Cluster Cab Franc. That's our
That's
first.
the winner?
You know what?
Amazing.
We had to fight really, really hard though to get
You sure did.
a club exclusive wine.
Sure did.
I fought for you guys.
It's been years.
I bled a little bit.
It's 2018 now, and you started here in 2014. It's been
Yeah.
4 years of you asking to get one.
Well,
So
when I first started,
you guys are in the club. She is pulling for you. I can guarantee it. Because we started the Innovation Series in 2014. First release would have been 15.
yeah, when I first started, they used to do it with the Syrah. So that was the deal. And then you guys like kicked up production of the Syrah, and we're just like, no. Terry and I were both like choked. And then
we still don't make enough Syrah, in my opinion. But that's...
Well, I think it's like everybody's opinion, but then we didn't have a club exclusive wine, and I think it's really important that, you know, we have fantastic club members. We need to do something special for them. Just saying. Got your back, guys.
She does. So, Cab Franc it is.
I think everybody's
Impressive.
voted. Yeah, the whole cluster innovation series Cab Franc.
By how many?
71%.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Solid. Well,
Yeah.
do I have good news for you at the end of this webinar?
Well,
Just saying.
what we could do is change the order and get straight into the whole cluster.
we could do that.
Well, we've got the fans.
Yeah. Let's do
Well, we've got
it.
our budget. Who's got their whole cluster Cab Francs open?
Yeah, right. They only had like 1 or 2 bottles they could get.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, clearly we need to
I
make
had
more
like
of this one.
Yeah.
So, innovation series, first time it's been available to pretty much anybody outside of Miradoro and exclusive restaurants in Vancouver. The case production is typically around 150 cases. And this one, have we poured any of the innovation series on the show before at all?
I think Moon and I did on the last one because I wanted him to talk about it from like a viticulturalist standpoint.
Okay.
And then I thought it would be good to try it tonight from a winemaker's perspective.
So the same wine then?
Same wine.
Okay.
Did you make another whole cluster Cabernet Franc that you
No,
just
I
talked
just
about?
meant innovation series because there's been previous innovation
No.
series.
Like, no, we
Okay.
haven't done. We haven't
Okay.
tasted any of the other ones.
See, she's getting upset with me for even mentioning the other innovation series that you guys haven't been able to get. So the whole project is really, it's kind of like a winemaker's dream come true. I've worked at a lot of wineries. I've met a lot of winemakers. We do sort of projects in the cellar every vintage. And I like to compare it to brewers. My brother's a brewer up in Kelowna, and he gets to make beer pretty much every week. He's making beer, gets to dial in on his recipes, change things. So he probably over the lifespan of a brewer gets to make, I don't know, 1,000 beers, probably more than that. Winemakers vintage happens once a year. So, you know, I'm turning 30 soon, and I've only had 10 cracks at it, and I probably only got 20 more. And what are you laughing at, Shalane?
The lies.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious, wasn't it? So we only get one shot a year at having trials and being creative. And so started with a Kerner orange wine.
Yeah.
I didn't even tell Sandra or the owners of Tin Horn at that time that I made that wine
Rebel.
until probably well into 2015. And so I was a bit naive. I didn't think it would ever, be sort of approved and bottled. But Sandra, who was an innovator at the time, was like, "No, this is delicious, and let's get it in glass and let's sell it, and we'll sell it exclusively." And the biggest proponents, like the guys that loved it the most, were the Soms, and that kind of made it allowed Tin Horn to kind of be a little bit rejuvenated on the wine geek Som stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one that Reese Pender for BCWI has poured many times. But that sort of kickstarted the innovation series. And so pretty much every year now, whether it's me or whether it's some of my interns, we make a project wine. And so this was the first one that we released at the club. And so again, going back, it's 100% whole cluster. And these are winemaking techniques that are typically more related to Syrah or Pinot Noir, not Bordelais varieties. And so when we second vintage that we've been grabbing fruit from Anarchist Mountain, single vineyard, always our first Cab Franc to come in, always perfect. And so we put it in some open tops and fermented it naturally, 100% whole cluster, barreled it down for just over a year, and turned out to be the poll-winning wine of this release, which is in some pretty tough competition. So
It is.
it's proved that it's done its job. It's also more or less unfined and unfiltered, which kind of happened by accident. But
I think,
That's
yeah,
another
this
time
is
for
definitely my
straight for the
favorite.
day.
I have a question from Bob.
Hi, Bob.
And they want to know if what's in the works for our innovation series this year.
Come to Miradoro in the spring and you'll find out.
I can't tell.
It's a secret.
She doesn't know.
No, but I know what I'm getting for club next year.
Well, you've tried that wine. You still want that for club?
Don't undersell yourself.
Wine takes time to perfect.
It does.
So
I'm hoping.
Shalane got a good lesson in winemaking processes this autumn
It was great.
when she was trying a barrel fermented wine. Let's just say it wasn't showing that well that day.
It wasn't. It went right to the back of my throat, and I coughed for about 4 hours.
She went straight to the bathroom. Is almost how that went down. Yeah.
I didn't want to tell you guys, but it's true. But no, this wine just makes me happy. Like there's just something about it that just really appeals to me, and I think that, I think it's a wine that really appeals to Jessica as well. So it's an easy thing for us to talk to you about club members.
Hundreds of fans that are watching right now.
Right?
I think, the whole cluster component, which is in the Pinot Noir, it adds a really beautiful perfume and bright, fresh fruit flavor profile. Typically for Cab Franc production, all of the berries are destemmed and crushed, and you're looking for a lot of tannin extraction and a lot of power. Whereas this wine, it has power, but it's in a much prettier style. It's kind of like Cab Franc meets Pinot Noir in that prettiness, but again, totally different flavor profile and just a unique expression of Cabernet Franc from a really, really great vineyard site.
Yes.
Carol has a question, and she wants to know if any of these are a must-have with food.
Oh.
If Chef Jeff was here, you'd say all of them.
Yeah, we need Chef
right?
Jeff.
Like, where's Chef Jeff? He's like, I pair this with everything.
Depends on your personality.
Yeah, I think deal with this with a straw and be like, hey.
Yeah, I mean, to me, any of the whites are certainly like aperitif wines. These are reds. The Merlot in its youth right now may be sort of in that vein, but the Reserve Pinot is a pretty big wine. The Innovation Cab Franc, big wine. Creek, also a bit more of a steak wine. So I would say the only ones, we got 3 out of the 6. Not too bad.
I would think that the whole cluster Cab Franc right now, like almost like it's winter time, so I think like kind of like stews, almost coq au vin, things like that.
I think the whole cluster Cab Franc when did it get released? The summer? May?
No, the whole cluster Cab Franc
it's released.
was bottled, but it went into the fall case.
Right.
For Oldfield Reserve members, and then it got opened up to everybody afterwards. When they didn't eat it all up, then
I'm just
opened
saying,
up to everybody.
When I started drinking it, which is well before everybody else.
Nobody likes a bragger.
In May or June, it was a much fruitier wine. And that's the thing with Old Cluster is you want to get into them when they are young. But I still think it's pretty delicious right now.
I was going to forget that I could have had this for the summer case. Just going to forget.
Okay.
Oh,
what's
so
next
good.
line?
Move on to the Merlot.
You know what? The 2016 Merlot. This is my go-to. This is my go-to like barbecue wine. I like this one for barbecue. It's not really barbecue weather, but we're in the South Okanagan.
I'm still barbecue.
Yeah, we're totally still barbecuing, right?
All the time. Yes.
I'm going to give this to you to pour for us.
Thank you. So 16, also a really, really good vintage, but cooler, certainly in October, than 14 or 15. And so I think for me as a winemaker, 16 was kind of a good recalibration to what the Okanagan is typically like. What do you got over there?
Just a little bit of Chard.
And so I think this is a really, really good Merlot. It's still, to me, it's quite tight. And I think that's a little bit by the production methods. As of 2016, we moved 100% to native ferments for our reds. So they take a little bit longer to start fermenting. They are on skins and they're extracted a little bit more. So they're a bit more tight, a bit more tightly wound, I would say. Still plenty of fruit. Still by far drinks better before our Cab Francs and obviously any of our reserve wines. But I think this wine tonight, to me, is showing that it's going to age very, very well.
That's going to age really, really nicely. That has like some really great mouthfeel. Like it's pretty. I find that really kind of like highly tannic, but it's nice though. Like I know that it's going to age well. Like it's going to become.
Well, you're pointing at your cheeks, and I don't get it in my cheeks. It's very much
I get it
in the back of the palate.
I get everything in my cheeks. The size.
I get it in my chin. My double chin usually is where I
start to see it. We have the camera angle so that we don't have our double chins. We should just show them our double.
I don't think there's even flavor receptors in the double chin, but thought I'd bring it up. I mean, I think this wine is really kind of the benchmark of where I'd like to see all of our Merlots from this point on. I mean, 2 vintages in. There's sort of a lot. I mean, there's some very good vintages, 14 and 15, prior to this, and a lot of me tinkering with the winemaking, learning a new facility, learning new vineyards. But I think if you like this wine, this is probably going to be what you'll see consistently from us, certainly from 17, also cooler vintage, and 18.
So was this mostly done? What oak was this in?
Also, this was sort of our first transition into a lot more Hungarian oak.
Okay.
This wine historically had been predominantly American.
And is that where you see us going, is more Hungarian and French and kind of starting to wean out our American oak program, or having a little bit of all three?
No, we'll always have all three. Absolutely love our varietal series Chardonnay. Those barrel ferments and American oak, I think, are really an important stylistic part of that wine. And then once it's done fermenting, then we typically actually flick it over to the Merlot. And so the Merlot is really, of all of our single varietal reds, the only one that still sees American oak. And I like its approachability. And I think if you go back, and we're going to try a 15 vintage next, but if you go back to the 15 Bordeaux reds, that we literally sold out of almost every single one in 5 or 6 months here. The quantities were small.
The 15 vintage for varietal and for our Old Field Reserve wines.
All the wines.
Like you just blink and they're gone. Like there's definitely something special about that vintage in most people's eyes.
Yes. So absolutely.
But this is yummy.
It is.
I quite like this, but I agree with you. It's a bit tight.
But see, it's not. I think a lot of our wines, based on our sites, and if you drink a lot of Okanagan wines, they are all quite fruity. And there's the reason why we moved to natural fermentation and sort of longer skin contact time, and longer maceration, without getting too nerdy. I'm looking to draw more spicy, more earthy tones into the wine so that it's not just fruit juice. And I think this is that we've kind of almost got there with this one. It's
definitely
still very much fruit forward. It's not green or herbal. But it is kind of got some sort of earthy complexity.
It really does.
And some
Did you have a question, Jessica?
I did. I had a question from Anne, and she wants to know what has changed with our aging over the years. So basically, our cellaring potential has grown, and why?
Good question, Shalane.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I actually I remember.
You've been part of some of these, many of these tastings.
So this is my take on this, and correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll try.
I'm wrong a lot, not a lot. Anyways, what I feel like back in the day, we were really reserved with how long we felt. There wasn't a huge history. to BC wines as to how long they could age. And so, I remember being blown away when you started, and it was like, with the 14 Gewürztraminer, and you put 10 years on it.
Yep.
And it just blew me away. I was like, what? And so,
yeah.
And you increase not only the white wine cellaring potential, but the reds as well. But I think there's more of a history.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Like, that's where I see it as a consumer, as I see it, like, there's actually a history. Like, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary next year. Like, we've tasted through our libraries. We know what we can do. Yeah. It's hard to say that a wine will age for 20 years and you've only been growing for, like, 5 years. But,
yes.
But tell me from your perspective. That was
no, you nailed it. The most important part was what we tasted all the back vintages, and Tinhorn is in a very unique position to go back 20, 40 years into your library to see how wines are tasting. There are some gems. For us, a big transition was when we moved from cork to Stelvin. Mm-hmm. Almost every wine, certainly every single red wine that we've made under Stelvin, which goes back to, what is that, vintage 08, 04 through 08, I think is when we started to transition. By 08, we were 100% Stelvin. Don't fact check me on that one.
And 14, so.
But when you roll back into the first 10 years that were under cork, most of them they're corked. They're not oxidized because of the wine being faulted and too old. And so there's always a couple of gems. And so when you go back to 98 and see consistently that your Bordeaux varieties are hanging in there, not only just with flavor, but with color, with tannin, and then you go back to 2008, which is not a short time ago either, and these wines are still fresh. 20 years is not it's not us being cocky, and it's not me being adding 10 years to what Sandra's expectations were. Sandra only knew the wines that she had made, and that ran for a solid 20 years, but she would put 10 years on the lifespan of those wines. And when you mentioned Gewürztraminer, you go back and try almost every single one of Gewürztraminer still drinks well. If you actually still have any of those, Gewürztraminer is probably one of the best aging white wine varieties that exists out there, and also one of my favorites, in which I've been collecting all of our Gewürztraminers, and I haven't really opened any of them.
Really?
Those are wines that I won't drink until they're probably 10 years old.
Interesting.
Start.
You know what I found interesting as well? So we did the vertical of the 2-bench white in January, and then we did a vertical of Pinot Gris, and the Pinot Gris were really nice as well.
Alsatian varieties hang in there.
And surprisingly, it was actually the white wines that sold quicker during the library sale this January than the reds.
Yeah.
Like, people were really excited to try those. I think it goes against the grain of how we think when we should drink white wines.
Do you think maybe people see old white wines and like, oh, that's clearly, especially that are 5+ years old, that's a strategy. Whereas with red wines at 5+ years old, they couldn't sell those. I mean, I'm not in sales probably for making exact comments like that. But
I think it's the opposite. I think that with red wines has always been seen to age. So it's not a fact of they can't get rid of those. I think that has been seen more from consumers on the white wines,
right? Because
people just tend to not sit on their white wines. It's beautiful here. It's hot all the time. I hated white wine when I first moved to the Okanagan. I did. I came from Alberta. I drank big, bold reds year round because it was always snowing. Shout out, Banff.
-40 in July.
Right? But I think there's that idea that white wines won't age well, when I think it's the opposite.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of our wine culture, and it's hard to buy old wines in general.
Yeah.
And the people that are spending money on library old vintages they're in the $100 price point, which we don't fight up in that category, nor do we want to. But
I think
is your arm getting sore?
I just wanted to make like she was. Like,
I was trying to think trying to see how long she'd hold up there. She started up here.
Is she sure or
started
is she
here,
unsure?
2 minutes go by, she's down here. 4 minutes go by, she's just like.
Oh.
I just
Better be
have
important.
a question.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes, I have a question from Vicky. I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, but do we have any plans to venture into a Passamento style wine? Does that?
I'd love to. Yes.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't either.
That
Explain.
is.
Okay, so for those of you that are not
Vicky,
familiar, thanks Vicky for asking a genuinely exciting question and one that I can educate our staff on in the process.
Yes, it's exciting. Thank you.
So Passamento is. So have you ever heard of a wine called Amarone?
Yes.
Or
I drink a lot of Amarone.
Recioto. So any of the Recioto or Vin de Paille. So all these wines that have existed for 2,000 years are more or less grapes that are dehydrated before they're actually pressed and fermented.
I would assume that would concentrate the fruit flavor.
Sugars, fruits, flavors. Well, it doesn't concentrate. It sort of changes the fruit flavor.
Okay.
Because there's very likely, not only is there dehydration, I could go on with this answer for a very long time, but I'll try to abbreviate it. Snapshots.
No, snapshots. I'm talking books. Just like Snapchat. What?
Too old for Snapchat. So Passamento essentially is dehydration of the grape bunches.
Okay.
And we have trialed that here in a variety of ways. We've done cane cut, which is more common in Australia. So in Australia, they'll go out and they'll actually just cut the cane. So the vine itself, if you cut the canes where the bunches grow on, it means the water and nutrients are no longer passing into the bunch.
Okay.
But in Australia, it's dry enough that you can just leave it in the vineyard and it will dehydrate on the vine like that. In areas where Passamento is more traditionally done, and the most common area would be Verona for Amarones and dessert wines based in northeastern Italy. It's actually not that dry there. And so they will physically go and hand harvest the fruit, bring them into sheds and dry them on racks. In what is now more like a modern, essentially like a barn with a lot of airflow and dry atmosphere. And so to answer the question is, no, we've never had the ability to do that style based on our existing facilities.
What about for an innovation series?
So the problem...
I just got total stink.
So the problem is with us. Well, in the Okanagan, the winter is actually our most humid time of year.
It's true.
And so, which it probably isn't actually in most Northern Hemisphere places, so it's not really an excuse. But for us, as we get into November and into December, anything that we've had out in the vineyard that I've noticed thus far, it will dehydrate through October, and then as we get into November, they actually gain moisture back. And you'll hear Andrew Boone talk about this as well, because it's a very serious issue for grape growing in general. So we don't generally have dehydration existing here into the later months, and I don't have a facility to dry out the berries. But inspirationally, I would love to try the style. There's definitely a lot of, I think we have varieties, specifically Muscat Atenel, which has been grown all throughout the Middle East, and they make raisins from it using the exact same process. So essentially, if you're not familiar with the Passamento wines, you take a grape, you take a raisin, come like in the middle, and then ferment that into a wine. That's essentially what you're doing.
That's a very good way to describe it.
I got there eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah.
But you got there.
I did.
That's the most important part in all of this, is that you got
And we
there.
seem to have any more
No.
It's okay. Are we gonna, have we done a little tasting?
No, we haven't done the taste of
on
the
No, we haven't gotten to the
I
creek
think
Oh,
we
yet.
yeah, the creek.
We want to hear what you think of it.
All right.
Well, ladies first, Shalane, what do you think of the creek? I'll talk about the vintage because it's the first 15. Well, Shalane's contemplating her
I'm just having a
Her
moment with
her-
this wine.
her sip.
Just have a moment.
2015. You've probably heard me harp on about it before. It is probably a 1 in 20 plus year vintage for us in the Okanagan. First vintage, all of the Merlot on all of our properties was ever harvested before October. Usually we don't even start picking Merlot until well into October. Just a very rocking vintage if you like big, powerful wines, which most Canadian consumers do because California wines do really, really well
Yeah.
in all of Canada. And so this is kind of our ode to California vintage. And I think there's two reasons for that. First off, it was hot.
Yeah.
But second of all, the yields for Bordeaux varieties were very, very low. We're usually aiming for somewhere between 3 to 4 tons per acre. We were well short of that this year. And so this creek quantity is down by, in terms of volume, 20% on the initial release.
That's okay. The club members are buying it.
They should, because the price is probably going to go up.
Buy it now.
Yeah. We did 900 cases of this wine. The Reserve Merlot is out. It's not sold upstairs yet, though, is it? We're still
The
in
15?
The 15? We're sort of on the transition.
Yeah, we're in
now.
the transition, but the 14 is beautiful.
15 Cab Francs Reserve sold out in
Sold out.
about
Like,
a month.
we blinked and it was gone.
Yeah. 15 Merlot, people probably, if you haven't had one yet, try that. If you can afford the creek in quantity, then I would look at grabbing some of that too. I would buy up as many 2015 Bordeaux varieties across, not just in Orton. If you like strong wines and you like this wine, surf the internet, join clubs, do whatever you need to do. Buy a lot of 2015 vintage Bordeaux reds because, like I said, 1 in 20 year vintage is sounds dramatic, but it's true. It is by far
like lots of blueberry,
Oh, yeah.
cherry. I find our Cabernet Sauvignon really has that blueberry, like very
I call it
much
blueberry
so.
pie
Yeah,
because
totally.
it's got that biscuity flavor too, and it's not.
Yeah,
It's kind of fresh blueberry though. It's not blueberry
It
jam. It's more like a fresh blueberry pie, and then that to me it has cassis as well, and not just ours. Like I think any South Okanagan Cab Sauv has that distinctive flavor, and that's I don't want to go back into why we made the Creek at minimum 50% Cab Sauv blend, but it's important. I think it's a very important variety for the South Okanagan that a lot of people sort of stigmatized and said, too cold in Canada to grow Cab Sauv. I think this is one of the best examples of a Cab Sauv dominated blend, and the 15 crushes it.
it does.
I'm proud of a lot of the wines that I've been a part of, but in terms of wines that I'm going to be stocking in my cellar and drinking for the rest of my life, this is absolutely the one.
Coming from the club perspective is that, I think club members were a little hesitant. They saw us releasing a flagship wine after being around for 23 years. The price point was definitely way, way different than what had previously been seen. And I think, the 14 is beautiful and elegant, but when they tried this 15 this year, I think that's when the buy-in really happened.
Yeah.
And they understood what we were doing, that there was value in it because it's a beautiful wine. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's
I was
one of my
lucky
favorites.
enough to actually have the components of this wine in barrel already before I committed to the 14 blend. So I already knew after looking at the 15, does it make sense?
Yep.
So I had the 15 Cab Sauv, but we had all of these amazing wines in barrel. And so when I was making the 14, which is our first inaugural release of the Creek, and we looked at it being Cab Sauv dominant, a lot of people around the table were like, well, everybody else is Merlot,
Gotta be like everybody else.
You sure you want to go this direction?
Yeah.
And then absolutely. And every vintage since it is for us. Cab Sauv is our best variety. The Cab Franc, everyone seems to love that too. So I'm not going to dispute the masses, but for me as a lover of Cabernet and BC wines and South Okanagan wines, that wine is my favorite. Well,
I think this is a good way to end. This is our favorite, but we have a few things we need to plug.
Right? Yes. Sorry.
We need to plug. So this guy is going to be in Alberta starting next week.
Yes.
There's a dinner at Sky Bistro in Banff on Friday.
Thursday's Yellow
Door Bistro, which is super cool. It's at Hotel Arts.
Yes.
I sent an email out to Alberta members where you can see the menu and all that other good stuff. Please note, it's not a Crush Club event, so I won't be there. I don't know if you want to go if I'm not there. Probably you do because this guy's there.
We'll bring a cardboard cutout of Chelan.
Just doing this.
And we'll have here and there. Carry around when I go to talk about all the
dancing
wines.
Together.
Yeah. I don't usually leave the province with a cardboard cutout of Chelan.
I know, it's true. And I don't leave without a cardboard cutout of you. So
Paul's watching. I know
Sorry.
not.
Sorry, Paul.
Paul is.
And then Jessica, myself, and Andrew Moon are heading to Burnaby to Atlas Steak and Fish December 4th. There's still a few tickets available. It's actually selling out really, really fast, which is super cool. That starts at 6:30. We will actually be bringing a little innovation series Cab Franc. It's not on the menu, but I thought, why not? And then
I'm also pouring at the Women's World Cup.
Slopeside. Ooh, Slopeside.
Yes, Lake Louise.
Are you going to be in your Sun Ice onesie?
They're hard to find. The one I had from
you just
the 90s doesn't
Japanese
fit
tourist.
anymore. Yeah, Japanese tourist is...
You know, Carol.
200 pounds and 5'11". Yeah.
And then here's the most exciting part. So free ship, our holiday free ship starts November 23rd. But because you guys are super cool and you come in to the Crush Club chats all the time, we are actually opening up free ship for you guys 3 sleeps early for you. So you can go in and order, it's 12 bottles or more, where you get your free shipping on any of the wines. We do still have...
What about for the Creek? 6 for the Creek?
Nope, 12 for the Creek. Everything is
Email
12.
Jessica, see if we can get away with 6.
I'm kind of a pushover.
No. And then we actually
I'm trying. I'm looking out for you too, Crush Club.
And wait a minute. So our favorite of the fall releases is that we still have, I think, maybe 6 cases left of the Innovation Series Cab Franc. It is not on the website, will not be on the website, so send us an email. We will make that part of your free ship offer as well. When you're checking out, under coupon, you need to put in free ship 18, all capital letters. And then the next webinar will be
taking notes.
You and I.
Back at it again.
Back to back. That's what we like.
We'll have more jokes planned next time. It'll be a bit
more jokes. It'll be like,
less
hello.
Serious.
Hey there, world.
We'll do 10 wines next time.
10 wines. Let's do 10 wines.
10 wines. And in the first 30 minutes.
Yes.
And then,
solid.
And then the rest is just jokes.
I'm in. You know I'm in.
Perfect.
So that's January 29th.
Oh, I'm not around. Oh, sorry.
You're totally around. Whatever. I gave you those dates long ago. But anyways, thank you guys so much for coming out again tonight. And if we don't talk before the holidays, happy holidays.
Yes. Merry Christmas.
Thanks.
Happy holidays.
Bye, guys.